And okay, so we're live. Thank you for joining us for Rick, Rabbi, and Rashi for the Parsha of VaYakhel. And it's gonna be a shorter segment today, but let's get right to it. So, Rick, you read the Chumash pretty well. There's a lot of commentary, and your Western mind was piqued by a couple of things. So, what's on your mind?
So, in this parsha, we talk about sort of the collective, the idea that of the community, the kihila, and things.
That's the name of the parsha is VaYakhel. He
right.
gathered. It's the theme is going to be gathering together.
I think they come from the same shoresh as kihila, exactly. Right?
Yeah. VaYakhel, the root is kahal. Kihila.
Kahal, right? Yeah. So I thought that was true. Anyways. So, this whole idea of the collective, there's a lot of things that seem to be not part of the collective. It seems like we're doing things. So my first question is that there were princes, or as you had explained to me earlier, there were governors or congress people, whatever, in each tribe. And the princes among the people encouraged the Israelites to gift to the Mishkan construction. We had talked about this earlier offline about the bringing of the gifts from the women and the craftsmen, etc. And in the interim, make their gifts too late and unnecessary. These are the princes that make their gifts too late and unnecessary. Can you explain further what the princes represent? The lessons learned from waiting until the end, which makes it unnecessary to gift to the construction, and doing God's will.
Okay, so just quickly, the prince. Every tribe had a nasi, a prince. Because every tribe, while we're all part of one Jewish people, we also, even back then, had specialties, special talents, and abilities in each tribe. One tribe were the merchants, and one were the scholars, and some were the soldiers. So you see every tribe had its own flavor. So it makes sense that you don't just have one prime minister, Moshe. Each tribe is also represented by its sort of spiritual leader, representing their unique talents. That's the idea of the prince. But they, of course, are a real Jewish leader, and all the Jews are they're really, as we call it today, a popular term, servant leadership. Right? They're there to represent and help make the people the best they can be. So when it comes to this drive to collect money and precious materials for the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, they're first and foremost, they say we have to make sure the people get the opportunity to do, and we'll clean up. So they basically said, we want the people to do it because that's our job, make sure the people do their best. And I'm sure there'll be a gap, and we're rich, or I guess they were men of means. We'll fill in the gap.
But see, the troubling part of that is it's sort of like leading from behind, right? Don't you usually ask a leader to sort of set the path, set the rails for people to follow? And wouldn't it be better if they established the boundaries? People could exceed those boundaries, obviously, in terms of their gifting, but instead of waiting to the end to do the cleanup, what if the cleanup is so minimal, or as in this case, it was unnecessary?
So
it becomes
so like everything, the Torah will tell us stories, and these great men, many times they are the example. They're great spiritual giants. It's not like they're a disgraced congressman that made a mistake. It's right. Spiritual ideals. That do I do this ideal, that ideal? So they tried this ideal. It wasn't the proper one. It wasn't the ultimate. And they actually correct course later on when it comes to another drive for the tabernacle, which is the sponsoring the public sacrifices, the animals that would be on the altar. They were the first ones then, because they learned we got to be right away.
Okay.
And what they learned the mistake was, so as it says in the Chumash, that what they should have done is, because this was such an important collective thing, they should have been part of that collective right away. They should have been the leading right. Front, or not in front, leading on the side together. I'll give, you'll give. Should not have been leading from behind. And that's why they even at the end, they didn't need them to give the precious stone because there was enough money from all the common Jews, but they felt so bad they wanted to have a part of it, so they gave the stones, and it had a slight benefit that you didn't have to go to the gem dealer to buy it. They just gave the actual stone, but it wasn't needed. So they lost out in a sense that they didn't have that, we got to raise $1 million to save, Ukrainian Jews. We need $1 million to build this orphanage. And they say, okay, I'll wait, sure there'll be a gap. And there's, from small online donations, $1.5 million comes, and the leader isn't needed. So he gives, he says, I'll sponsor, I'll give a marble bathtub or whatever. It's more symbolic than it is needed, and they lose out on that because of that. So I think the Torah tells us about it, that while they meant well, and there's some merit to that, but ultimately in this case it was a little bit off because it's about VaYakhel, it's about collective, and we all got to be part of it right away.
So I'll go back to my thought about sort of predetermination, right? I mean, there are always lessons within the Torah, and it's sort of predetermined. Is God predetermining to do this so that later on he can actually tell people, this is really the wrong way to do it, this is really the right way to do it? And the other thing is, what happens to the princes? Are they really not part of the Kehillah because they come so late, even though they put like you said, the marble bathtub in? It's unnecessary, a marble bathtub in an orphanage, right? I mean,
so it might be a bad. These were actually needed. These were needed. These were God.
Oh, okay, all right.
These were actually needed, but it was not. Their donation did not have the same status.
Right.
It was sort of like after the fact. Like it was okay. They're in the ledger. They're part of it, and that's why they felt lacking, and they made up for it later on. They were the first to donate the animals needed. So that's a good question, General. How does the Torah work about mistakes? This is a huge conversation. Ask mystics. Every time it says that one of the tzaddikim makes a mistake, it's not a mistake. It's presented in a mistake, but it's not an actual mistake. The way it's presented in a very simple way that we can relate to it, but there's a lot deeper ideology which really under the engine there. So this is an example. Oh, they were lazy. They didn't give it. Really, there was a whole ideology of leadership. There was a whole leadership idea they thought was appropriate, and perhaps in a certain context it was appropriate. It's just that in this context it was not the ultimate, and that's why there was a certain, I wouldn't call it sin, but a certain lacking.
So in today's parlance, it would be called a teaching moment.
Yes, it was definitely. That's the Torah has a lot of teaching moments, and I think the righteous, the tzaddikim, this is a huge discussion, maybe controversy, because according to Kabbalah, the real saints, they don't have the same temptations me and you have, or 99%. They're tzaddikim, they have a different function. They're more of like a role model of spirituality in the world. Mm-hmm. But so do they want to have a temptation for something that you and I, regular people, have a temptation? According to Kabbalah, they do not. So why does the Torah depict them in many ways like it? Like King David, committed adultery, it seems like it, right? Or he desired another man's wife. King David, it says he slayed his Yetzer Hara, like he did surgery on it, and he didn't have. So how could he have the seemingly very base desire? So the Gemara actually deals with it. It wasn't so simple. It wasn't really the way you would think of it as reading the straight storyline. Kabbalah would go a step further. King David, there was a whole spiritual dynamic here. But why does the Torah depict it in such, pedestrian and even mistaken, like men of error mistakes? And the simple reason it's because their goal is to be a role model on every level for every type of Jew. So it will depict a deep spiritual calculation idea, and maybe misstep, but it's not a misstep like a sin. It's more of like a misstep in spiritual prioritization. but it will be depicted in a very basic way for the benefit of Jews for all eternity. That's
so like last week's parsha, we take the Torah and we keep turning and turning and turning, right? We keep turning the Torah. We keep looking at it.
You have to look in it, yeah.
So
if you look at them, they made a mistake. They were lazy. They weren't really lazy. It was a spiritual prioritization dynamic, and they thought this and it was that. So is it a sin? I don't know if you call it a sin. Was it a lacking? It was a slight. There was a spiritual lacking which they learned for the next time. But to
a lapse of good judgment.
Yeah, but in a much more like sublimated way. Not like our lapse of judgment, but like in a much more of a sensei or of a mystics, thing. Anyways, but that's about the princes. So back to now we have time for one more question.
Okay, all right. So I was fascinated by the discussion about the mirror, the gift of the mirrors, and like in Judaism, one of the things, like when someone passes away, you cover the mirrors, because we all understand why we cover the mirrors. But so this gift of the mirror for the construction, God deems it appropriate because he felt the mirrors created a sensuality that led to the growth of the Israelites when they were enslaved, and in other words, they grew the people, right? And yet, Moses feels that the gift is sort of profane, right? Because it aroused lust. So my question is, who was right, and why the misalignment between God and Moses? Moses is his messenger.
Which verse did it speak about the copper mirrors? Do you remember?
Now I gotta go find it. Hang on.
Was that last week or this week?
No, it's this week. It's about the mirrors this week. Hang on.
I can tell you, I do remember, the basic idea behind it is, so what are these mirrors about? So these copper mirrors, the women would, look and they do their adornments and make them. If you remember, in Egypt, Pharaoh had a three-phased plan for the Jewish problem. The first one was not direct genocide. It was, I'm going to enslave them so much that they're going to be so tired and demoralized and have such a bleak future for them that they simply will stop wanting to have mass amounts of children like they were. The Jews were exploding in population. So it's going to enslave them and take away their spirits for continuity. And that's very much what would have happened. The men went out to the field and they worked as Billy Joel says, their finger to the bone, they were, the wives, it says the wives were the real righteous ones of that era. They knew that God promised their forefathers they're going to leave Egypt and go become and get the Torah and become a Jewish people. And they knew that there had to be Jewish children. So they would go, they would catch, it says little fish, I don't know, it's herring or whatever, and they would boil them and they'd make, platters of, herring, whatever it was, fish, and they would beautify themselves before they'd come out to the field with these snacks and water for their husbands, and they would arouse, the gleam in the husband's eye to, in spite of his brokenness of being a slave, he would want to be intimate with his wife and they would have children. And that's sort of the backstory of what those mirrors were from or what they represented. And Moshe said, look, obviously it's a needed part of humanity. A wife and a husband have to get together and have children. But to be in the temple, there's a time and place for everything. I would think that, human procreation, I don't know, lust is the right word, more, human attraction, to be represented at all in the temple, I don't know if in the temple is the right place. Time and place, everything's about time and place, right? I was just listening to a podcast about Rabbi Steinsaltz. His son was giving a memorial for him. One of his great abilities, Rabbi Steinsaltz, was he really contextualized 2,000 years worth of Jewish theology and Talmud that to the modern brain that we can contextualize. Like we talked earlier about, the husband, the woman, and money and stuff like that.
Right.
The context. So what's time and so most of the time and places is the wrong thing to be. These mirrors of the female attraction that wooed her husband, so to speak. And God differed. It says that this is the holy of the holies. This is holy. This is not let's be ashamed of. Done in the right way, a Jewish marriage with a love and affection. This is not something to be I mean, I don't know if the right is not to be prudish. I don't think there was, naked statues or anything like that. But the idea is that to totally shy away from representing that's not good. And so, I think this reminds me of a vote of the men of the Great Assembly or the rabbis in the Talmud in a certain era. They were voting of which books of prophecy would be in the canon of the Tanakh. There was many other books of prophets that didn't make it, just for the record. And they were debating which books, because a lot of these books are written with divine inspiration, and which ones. And they settled ultimately in 24 of them. There's 24 books of the Tanakh. One of them was a book written by King Solomon with divine inspiration called Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. And it's really a love poem. And it's a parable of a maiden and a shepherd and the love that they have for each other. And it's a love. And they're like, the rabbis are, this cannot be in the canon of the Tanakh. And Rabbi Akiva said, if all the books of the Tanakh are holy, Shir HaShirim is the holy of holies. And his vote carried the day and it became part of the Tanakh.
Wow.
So it's interesting the way we look at, husband, wife, physical intimacy and attraction. Like Judaism is not about, hiding feminine beauty. There is laws of modesty. There is context, but it's not something which is, totally, shielded and not represented. If feminine beauty with modesty, whatever, there's parameters, is something to be really is something that is given attention in Judaism. Maybe.
So I gave some thought to it myself, and I thought about the mirror. I thought about the mirror as sort of a physical object, right? It's merely a physical object. But what does a mirror do? It reflects back, right? And what is it reflecting back? It's reflecting back your soul. So it's like you look in the mirror and it reflects who you are. And you become a better person through that mirror, right? It's not about I like the idea of the sensuality and the love. I mean, all of that is an interesting discussion. I sort of took it one step further and thought about it as something that really belonged in the temple because it was reflecting our souls. When we use a mirror, somehow we try to be our best selves, right? I mean, we become beautiful.
It's interesting, yeah, because on one hand, we don't want to be vain.
Right. No, not vanity.
And a mirror could be at an extreme used as a tool of vanity, but at the same time, we it's not, we don't do away with it entirely. We right. do mirrors and we do look at ourselves. That's a very interesting. That's very Steinsaltzian to look in. What's the mirror concept represent?
Yeah, so I vote for the mirrors to be in the temple. So I was good with that passage. It was all good. Anyways,
I think a lot of all these questions. We're just, as usual, we're just touching the tip of the iceberg.
I know.
The Mishkan, as we said, God said, "Make for the Asuli Mikdash v'Shachanti b'tocham." Make for me a temple, and I will dwell within them. And it should have said it, but it said within them. And the Talmud says because the physical Mishkan represents the spiritual Mishkan temple of every one of us, our individuals. And these discussions we're having of the copper laver made from the mirrors, or even the building, the process. It's interesting. We're not just talking about, there's an interesting book by a very famous educator called Mindsets. I forgot her name offhand, Mindsets. But she talks a lot about process versus results. And we're in modern era, we're very obsessed with results. And there's a certain whole, movement about really, we don't want to necessarily be like lazy and non-efficient, but at the same time to really celebrate process. And I think we talk a lot about the symbolism of the ultimate furnishings and the things in the temple, but here we're giving a lot of our discussion with the leaders and their process of when they gave it and their mistake, and Moshe discussing, should we accept the mirrors of the women or not? The process is also something very important that we learn eternal lessons from, like that we're discussing this parsha, the process, and trying to unpack it a little bit. So.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful learning session. It's just before Shabbat, so I'll wish you Shabbat Shalom and everybody on the podcast. And I look forward to our getting together.
We have because we missed last week. We did make a catch up YouTube video of last parsha. So if you didn't get a chance to, if you felt that void in your life from not hearing Rick and Rabbi last week, you can binge this week. So
they get a double dose.
Double dose, exactly.
Or they
all the best.